Is there a number, a count as to how many tons of PCBs are in the Hudson?
The estimates are about, I would say, if you're going to talk in, let's talk pounds, because that's
Okay.
the kind of common thing. Maybe a million pounds or more of PCBs went into the upper river.
The winds of March. Thankfully, they're about to leave us. This is the end of March, after all. But there's still a lot of wind brewing about what's underneath the water we see behind us in the Hudson. The PCBs. And today, Professor Sanders from Columbia University is going to give us a history of sorts about what's been going on over the past 10 years and what perhaps we might see in the future. We'll find out all about it in just a moment when we come back right here on the river. Professor Sanders, before we get into the specifics here, give us some background on your involvement in the river over the past years.
Well, I'm a geologist interested in the history of the river from the geologic point of view, and also the actual behavior of the river itself. When the General Electric Company and the state of New York made their settlement about the PCB pollution question, a committee was formed called the Settlement Advisory Committee, and that met in October 1976 for the first time, and I was appointed as a member of that committee. We have about 12 members, and I would say 9 of them are part of that original group. We've had a few changes, but it's amazing the longevity of the members.
The hearings that are going on so far have been at the exploratory stage. Exactly where does that stand right now? What is the stage they're at right now?
The administrative trial judge is named Lewis, and he has conducted a session in which everyone has come to present their arguments, and he will then organize all that and write it up, and on the basis of that, the citing board will begin its actual work of hearing testimony. That's still to be scheduled yet.
Now, this testimony concerns exactly what? What is at issue?
Well, the department has made a request for the permits and the permissions, and the key document is what's called a Certificate of Public Health and Necessity, requesting approval to establish an encapsulation site in Washington County to receive, for the time being, sediments to be dredged out of the Hudson River.
PCB sediments.
PCB polluted sediments in a place called the Thompson Island Pool, which is just south of Fort Edward.
Now, the issue here appears to be that the people of Fort Edward don't want this toxic sludge dumped in their backyards. Is that correct?
That, of course, is a big problem, and in my opinion, the state is not really set up administratively to handle problems like this comfortably. I think they need to establish something like the Thruway Authority or the Triborough Bridge Authority, some group that has existence from year to year that can make financial commitments and make commitments to maintain a site as long as would be necessary. And also to make certain guarantees that any neighbor of any such facility has a right to expect. And at the moment, the state is, this is the first time they've done a thing like this. And they're trying to work out how this would be done. At the moment, I think what they're counting on is that the state will be happy to follow any strictures that the siting board establishes. So it will be up to the siting board to say, all right, state, you have to guarantee this, that, and the other thing, to make sure that the people don't have to suffer losses in a cause that theoretically should benefit us all.
Are these people thinking in terms of another Love Canal could happen?
Well, the Love Canal happened because it was a surprise. The material was there, they built their houses on top of it, and they didn't know. They're just fearful that having a facility like that next to them will change their property values. I think the state can convince any scientifically oriented observer that it won't be hazardous to their health to do this, but just the fact that such a thing is there is on the books, and they're not interested in that. They'd rather have it somewhere else.
There's been a recent report of several workers who were involved in dredging of the PCBs back in the early 70s dying of cancer. Is that going to be at issue here?
That whole issue, of course, is a very important one, and I must say, one that our committee has been totally frustrated by, because in all the times we've been in existence, we have continually pressed the medical community, tell us, what is it that PCB does to people? You say it has this and that potential hazard. Show us a case, because the General Electric Company is now publishing papers alleging that PCBs are not harmful to people. And yet you have the evidence from the animals and so forth that it may be causing cancer. We must know this. And I have felt just privately all along that if we had a body count, we'd get people a lot more serious about this, because they tend to say, well, why bother?
PCBs have been in the river for a couple of decades now, at least.
Yeah.
The area is mostly north of Albany, where they are mostly...
Well, most highly concentrated, but they're present all down the system, all the way down to New York.
How far? All the way down to New York?
Sure, and it even goes out into the ocean. So it affects the fish on a broad scale. That's the big problem in terms of exposure to people.
What is the physical process that happens here? The PCBs, these polychlorinated biphenyls, is that?
That's correct. Yeah.
They settle, they were insulation on the back of refrigerators, primarily.
Well, they're what's called a dielectric fluid. And such a fluid has a high resistance to being set on fire, and it's also resistant to electricity. So they're in what are called capacitors and transformers, and those are everywhere. So the General Electric Company was manufacturing these gadgets, mostly capacitors, in the plants at Hudson Falls and Fort Edward.
These are on utility poles even to this
Oh,
day.
yeah, you can still see them, but they're inside of every, even a fluorescent light fixture. There's a little coin-shaped thing in there that takes care of the starting surge of the electricity. So in terms of people's value to humanity, these were never intended to be harmful. It was not like an insecticide or something where they're targeting, kill organisms. They had a huge benefit to people, mainly because they put an end to electrical fires. Before these things were used, these PCBs were used, they used to use mineral oil, and that would have a flash point sufficiently low that there were fires. A lot of people died on account of these fires. So in terms of that aspect of the use of PCBs, they were a great boon to humanity. And they were amazing compounds. They have many other uses. They use them in newspaper printing ink, and they use them in plastics, and they use them in various kinds of cooling oils. And literally, they were in throughout our industrial society.
So when General Electric was emptying these PCBs, or the byproducts of the PCBs, into the river?
Well, what it was is they'd spill these things when they were filling the cans and whatnot, and every day when they'd hose down the floor of the manufacturing plant, well, some of this stuff would be in the water, and it would just wash out, and they'd dump it in the river. So they were not willingly just throwing this stuff away. They paid money for it after all, but it's no way of knowing how much of that material went to the river. They talk about, well, they maybe lost 1% in the manufacturing, and they bought so many millions of pounds that even 1% is a huge amount. It would be several millions of pounds that went into the river. So we have tried to work back and figure out how much is there, but it's only approximately known. But it's a lot.
Can you tell us what exactly has settled on the bottom of the river, and how does this affect the fish and the physical relationships?
The particles, the PCBs are not soluble in water, so they tend to settle to the bottom and get attached to sediments. And they'll stay with the sediment. So if the sediment doesn't move, the PCBs tend to stay on the bottom. Right? When the sediment moves, the PCBs go with it. So as far as the fish go, they get the PCBs in two ways. First of all, the small animals, the invertebrates that are part of their food chain, pick up the PCBs out of the sediments. And the fish eat those organisms and get the PCBs. But they'll also get it just by having it come in their gills.
Then if we catch them and
we catch the fish
eat them,
and then we eat the fish. That's our main source of ingesting PCBs.
Professor, is there a number that we can go by of how many PCBs are in the Hudson River? How do you measure this?
Maybe a million pounds or more of PCBs went into the upper river. And of that, a lot has washed down to New York City, maybe 200,000 pounds worth over the years, have got down to the city. Another maybe 500,000 pounds or so has been taken out, and because the Department of Transportation operates canals, and the sediment would come into the canal system, and then they would block the canals, they take it out. So over the years, dredging has removed maybe 2 million yards of sediment, much of it contaminated with PCBs.
And where has it been placed?
In various places up some in Saratoga County in the town of Monroe, some on a place called Rogers Island right in the town of Fort Edward. Various, whatever the state had what's called a waste disposal dump site, they would put that. Now, so for many years they would dump this without any worry about what pollutants it might contain. They just put it there.
Now, how will this affect the Fort Edward situation based on this as an example?
Well, we hope that as members of the committee began their work basically opposed to the idea of dredging. We felt there must be some other way that this problem could be solved. And I think most every one of us felt that dredging was not the thing to do, because you have this vision of dredging stirring up the sediment and so forth. So the department initially asked us, could we, in a 6-month period, get enough information to say yes or no about the future of dredging? And so we started on an attack like that. We had the Corps of Engineers experts come and talk about dredging. We investigated all sorts of things. And then it finally became apparent that the state has a constitutional mandate to keep the canals open. So they're going to dredge no matter what. Right? They are obliged to dredge periodically. So one of those dredging operations was scheduled, and we said, all right, if you want us to support dredging as a mechanism for cleaning up, do one. You know, actually go out there and do one of your dredging operations, and we'll watch it, we'll monitor it, we'll design an encapsulation site to put the material so it'll be safe. So we will make a dress rehearsal out of this for the whole big proposal that you want to do. And when we're done, if we find that this is acceptable, then we'll support it. Mm-hmm. And that was the attitude that we had. So, you know, like, you know, I'm from Missouri, show me, right? So they did. They did their dredging, and we made an encapsulation site, and everything passed muster with us, and we were very critical about this. So the committee feels that they have an actual working basis for understanding where the potential problems are with one of these operations, and that it can be done in a sound and safe way. And so that's why we're supporting it. We think there's no other way at this time to clean up the river.
Professor, recently I read where we're talking about a $40 million investment to dredge, and only 9% of what we talk about PCBs will be actually cleaned up. Is that the correct way this is put?
If we're going to talk about percents, then you're right away, you have to say percentage of what. Right? And at this point, in order to make it a little more graphic to understand the numbers involved, I propose that we shift over and talk about metric tons, right? Which is 2,200 pounds. Because it's a little easier to manage about the metric tons, because the numbers are smaller. Right?
All right.
Now, we know from studies that have been made over the years past, the last 10 years, that 90% of the PCB load in the river that comes over the dam at Troy gets in the river north of the Thompson Island Dam, from two places basically, the Thompson Island Pool and the sediments that are north of the old Fort Edward Dam, known in our language as the remnant deposits. In other words, what this is, a lot of wood, debris, and other material soaked up with PCBs, and it was jammed up behind the Fort Edward Dam. They took that dam away, and then now these sediments are out of the water. So you can see right there by walking along the banks of the river what it used to be like on the river bottom. Right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of that material is loaded with PCBs and still gets into the river. So the remnant deposits are a source, and the Thompson Island Pool are the source. So in those two places, it's estimated that you have maybe half of the total amount of PCBs that's in the river at all. The rest of it's scattered between Thompson Island and Troy. Right? Now, of the half that's up there providing us with most of the material, the proposal is to get what's in the Thompson Island pool. Right? So we're proposing to take out about 10 tons, metric tons of PCBs out of the Thompson Island pool. It's an estimated that there are maybe 45 tons in those two areas, the Thompson Island pool and the remnant deposit. So we're going to take out about a quarter of the bad actors that are really active to the river. Right? Not going to touch what's below the Thompson Island Dam, not going to do anything about the remnant deposits, although the committee wants to, but that's not going to happen now. So 9% might be the total in the whole upper river, because it's estimated that there's 90 tons, let's say, in the whole upper river, and we're going to take out 10. So that's, what, 1 in 9.
Okay.
So in terms of the active supply to the river, the everyday action of the river, we're really going to go for about a quarter.
Even though it's not an overall PCB extraction per se.
Well, we have it. If you wanted to clean up the whole river, you'd have to practically dredge it bank to bank from Troy all the way up. Right? And we have an estimate for that. You know, it's like $400 million. Right? That's a lot of money.
Keep a lot of people busy for a
while.
while.
It certainly would. But I mean, the scale of that is almost mind-boggling.
Yeah, that would take also a lot of years. I would
Many
imagine.
years.
Yeah.
It would indeed. But that's one. If you really want to clean up the upper river, that's almost what you have to do. There is nothing else that we know of now that can handle this. Right? You got to get it out of the river. Right?
Professor, you have a concern for unruly flooding, and we're going to have a lot more water in the river come the next few years.
What we have established now, without any doubt, I think, is that the amount of PCBs that comes down to the fish in the lower river is a direct function of how much water is flowing down the river. In other words, we have a wet year, you get more PCBs. You have a dry year and fewer PCBs. Right? And right now, the fish values and everything are in adjustment to the amount of discharge, the water discharge. Now, we've just come through a period in which the amount of discharges has been decreasing. Right? In other words, we had some droughts and all that sort of thing that have been in the public view. So the flow of the river, the actual measured flow of the river, is on a downward trend, and it's due to hit bottom and start back up again. Right? Now, that whole issue of the possible cyclic flow of the water is not one of general agreement. I happen to be on the side that says that the cycle is real, but there are others who doubt this. But let's suppose it's real for the moment, and we're going to have, in the next 10 years, an increasing flow every year instead of a decreasing flow. This means that no matter what we do in the way of a proposed cleanup, the values to the fish and the values to the lower river are going to increase because the water is going to increase. More water, more PCBs. So that the unfortunate prediction that is tied up with that is that we are in for a increasing load of PCBs. Now, if we are successful and are allowed to do this proposed cleanup, we think that will make a significant impact on the river. But it might have to be measured in saying, well, it didn't go up as much as it might have if we didn't, you see. So we're going to be in trouble out of this. I see this as a really tight problem because we say, well, it's going to benefit the river to take these sediments out. It's about 10 years worth of normal flow that we're proposing to take out. There's about a ton a year comes over the dam. So we're working on 10 years worth.
Where does this extra water come from? Where will it come from?
Just the rain. Just irregular rainfall. Again, that's a meteorological problem of very great importance. Do we have cycles in our rain, wet and dry years, and that kind of thing? And it's a hotly debated issue amongst the specialists. And I'm working on some things that incline me to the view that, yes, we do have cycles. But others say, no, it's very random and so forth. So there's no unanimity of opinion on that question.
Professor, we see a river where there is a lot of sport fishing these days. You catch it and you throw it back, you don't eat it. Is there ever going to be a time when it will be safe once again to eat the fish you catch in the Hudson?
Let's go back to our problem of the numbers. Right? If we're right about our analysis of the distribution of these PCBs, then there's about 50 years worth of PCBs in the upper river. Okay? Roughly half of that in the remnant deposits north of the old Fort Edward Dam, and half of it in the Thompson Island Pool. Right? So I'm assuming 50 years worth on the basis of the present flow rates, which means we get about 1,000 pounds a year, which is roughly, a metric ton a year. It's about 2,000 pounds a year comes over the dam. Now that's maybe a fifth of what it used to be. In the days when the GE plants were running and all these other things were going on, there used to be maybe like 5 tons a year come over the dam. Now it's down to 1. Right? So if you say a ton a year, and we've got up there 50 tons yet to go, and 50 years.
Mm-hmm. So it's
we're proposing to take out 10 years worth, so we can't say exactly what's going, except that if that is allowed to happen, then we have advanced the happy day by 10 years. Right?
So it's not for necessarily our time, but
well, it depends. Now, I think there's a whole lot more riding on this operation than most people realize, because the position of the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. They are now looking at this operation in the same way that the committee looked at this operation with New York State way back in the beginning. And EPA's attitude is, if you show us that you can do this, right, you can do this dredging and encapsulate the sediments, we're prepared to move ahead under Superfund and get the whole river cleaned up.
Is that a likelihood? Is that?
It's in their record of decision. See, they made an evaluation of the Superfund situation several years ago, as far as PCBs go. And they're on record as saying that's where they are.
How would President Reagan's recent veto of the Clean Water Act, the addended version of it, affect that?
Wouldn't affect it at all, because we have a reauthorization of the Superfund legislation. Right? There's several interesting aspects of that as far as the Hudson River is concerned. One is that the EPA is obliged to go back and re-examine their decision on the basis of the public health aspects of all decisions they already made. In other words, they got to go back and retrofit, you might say, all their decisions based on the new Superfund law. They haven't done that yet. They're just setting up to do it. But in the meantime, since they made their Superfund decision on the river, the Federal Food and Drug Administration has dropped its level of acceptability of PCBs in fish from 5 to 2. So at the level of 5, the EPA could say, well, it doesn't seem like it's a health hazard. Mm-hmm. But when it's 2, now it's a health hazard. And this question of the fate of the workers who were exposed to the PCBs in those earlier dredging operations, that's all very pertinent to this, you see, because if the federal authorities were to say now that there's a big health hazard for everybody on the Hudson River, they will move immediately on that and clean up the whole river. Right? Now, when they do that, they have already notified the General Electric Company that they are the responsible party for this, and it ultimately would be the General Electric Company will have to pay for this. Right?
General Electric wants to testify at these hearings. A lot of people find that surprising. Why do you think this is going on?
They've applied for full party status to oppose the department's request. And that has several ramifications. First of all, the state and the GE made a settlement. That committee that I'm on, we came into existence as a result of this settlement. And under that settlement, the state cannot move against GE to do anything more about the Hudson River. And now, well, perhaps if the GE now moves against the state on this operation, the state may then say to GE, hey, our agreement's off, right? So that's a possibility. I don't know how that would work out, but it seems to me that's one of the things that you have to think about. But GE sees this big Superfund potentiality that the EPA is still holding over their head. You see, that's what they'd like to head off, right? Because the federal government has not settled with GE. Right? Uh-huh. The state did. And so if the cleanup of the river were to be done under the Superfund laws with the EPA moving the operation, General Electric would have a considerable cost liability for that.
Let's look ahead a little, Professor. Where do you think this situation will be 1 year from now?
Probably still in the courts. I'd like to see us out there doing the job, but the nature of the things has so many potentials for appeal, I think, that I don't see a decision coming too soon.
This has to frustrate you.
It does. The thing that's most frustrating about it is that we, as scientists and as concerned citizens and so forth on this committee, think we have done a very thorough job, and that there isn't any better big project that's ever been proposed in terms of what's right for the river and that sort of thing. And now it's all going to be settled on the basis of legal decisions and legal precedents and other legal matters that we have no control over. So we just have to sit and wait.
Well, we're not sitting, but we are waiting for word from General Electric. GE has told us that after the hearings, someone from the company will speak to us and give their side of the story. So you must wait with us. But join us again next week, same time, same place, right here on the river.